Chances are, if you're an Australian, you've probably been cut down by tall poppy syndrome before. We're taught from preschool to retirement, don't get too big for your boots, don't make too much noise, don't expect special treatment, stay humble, stay small. It was originally designed to unify us through humility, but somewhere along the way, humility becomes invisibility. Welcome back to the Taurean Empress, where we explore the soul weather of the week through astrology, tarot, and archetypal psychology. So last week we spoke about releasing the ambitions that don't belong to us. Where have you been playing by someone else's rulebook? This week we're asking, are you ready to be seen now? This week begins with the full moon in Capricorn, as we discussed in last week's video. Now, every full moon is a culmination, a harvest, and this particular story began back in January under the Capricorn New Moon. So if you take a moment to think back, what were your New Year's resolutions? How are you going with them? And do they still ring true as something that you really want? Because the chances are, if you've forgotten what was on your New Year's resolutions 2026 list, if you've fallen off the proverbial bandwagon, it's most likely not because you're not disciplined. It's because your heart is calling you somewhere else. We often set our goals around what we're told we should want. We should want to be healthier. So we sign up to the gym membership, we purchase the protein powder and set our watches to reach 10,000 steps. And none of that is wrong. This all makes perfect rational sense. But the question I'll pose to you is this: is it you? Is it really your dream to be a gym bunny wearing matching sets? No shade if it is. Or are you someone who comes alive catching up with friends and dancing until midnight? If your heart of hearts says that you want to go running at 5 a.m. every morning, go for it. Go for gold. But are you really actually somebody who prefers slow, nourishing mornings with a cup of tea watching the sunrise? It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what mountain you set your sights on. What matters is that it's yours. Because the Capricorn full moon asks us to check in with our progress and release what no longer feels authentic. And this is important because as the moon moves into Aquarius, moves through Aquarius on Tuesday and Wednesday, this is going to become really obvious. Anything that doesn't feel emotionally authentic is going to really chafe. Now, as we discussed last week, one of the most important stories unfolding this year is Chiron's first steps into Taurus, which began last week. Taurus governs value, self-worth, and resources. But more than that, as the earthy Venus-ruled sign of the zodiac, Taurus is where our inner world becomes embodied, where our values become tangible. If Aries is impulse, Taurus is desire. Now, when we talk about Chiron, we're looking at the wounded healer. So when Chiron shows up in the sensual sign of Taurus, it's providing opportunities for us to heal our relationship with our gut instinct. Do you notice that you often leave a family gathering with a pounding headache? Perhaps your body is asking whether you've been working too hard for someone's approval. Do you notice that you feel a knot in your stomach every time you walk into a meeting at work? Perhaps your body is letting you know that your productivity has been demanding too much. Now, of course, not every headache or upset stomach has a deeper meaning. But Our bodies can sometimes alert us to stress, tension, or misalignment long before our minds are ready to acknowledge it. When partnered with the Capricorn full moon, this placement invites us to see where ambition has quietly become compensation, where we've tried to prove our value. Because if our self-worth depends entirely on what we achieve, it's no wonder we're exhausted. I can see this playing out in my own life. So at the beginning of the year, I was still working in a government role. I had been there almost 7 years and I had worked my way up the ladder, so to speak. And I had put in the hours to deserve it too. I believed that if I worked harder, took on more responsibility, and proved myself enough, eventually I would feel valued. I led my team with pride and even brought new people onto the team. After years of trying to prove myself and keep everyone happy, I found myself at the center of a workplace conflict that left me feeling deeply betrayed by someone I had trusted and someone who had even helped. The details almost don't even matter. What mattered was the lesson. I realized that I had spent years people pleasing and ignoring my own intuition. I had seen the signs, the warning signs, the red flags. I had felt that something wasn't aligned, but I kept abandoning myself because I wanted to be liked. I wanted to belong. And while I don't excuse the behavior that hurt me in the end, I now see that the situation was revealing a much bigger pattern within me. I knew the universe was trying to show me how I had been betraying myself and my own heart for 7 years now. I realized that people pleasing is basically a betrayal of our own integrity, or it can be if we let it. I realized that every time I abandoned my own truth to keep someone else comfortable, I was compromising my integrity with myself. Because when I started the job, I only had plans of sticking around for a year to build some savings, which would fuel my creative passions. But that 1 year turned into another year and then another and another. And after years of loss after loss and several separate traumatic situations, I wanted to earn enough money just to support my family and survive. I eventually stopped writing, I stopped singing, I stopped creating. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to run for cover after a downpour. Some seasons are for surviving, but eventually surviving stops feeling like living. God was calling me back to myself, saying, your heart is ready to try again. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I really believe this. Ironically, the moment I decided to leave the job was when I finally was offered the promotion that I was working for. Now, this was back in January at the time of the Capricorn New Moon. For years, I had convinced myself that the goal was financial and emotional security. It looked good on paper. It sounded respectable. It sounded good when I would tell people, and it made sense for a retirement plan until I remembered that the title was never the dream. Creative freedom was. It wasn't easy to leave. And maybe the goal you set yourself in January seemed impossible to you as well. Maybe this full moon is the illumination on your path that you've been praying for. For me, it marks the culmination of a journey to redefine for myself what success means. Today, 6 months after leaving and only days away from the Capricorn full moon, I found myself back at my old office building. And I looked at that version of me in my mind's eye. The woman who thought she was trapped, who thought security was all she was allowed to have. And I thanked her for finally being brave enough to jump. Because sometimes the mountain we're meant to climb is the one that leads us back to ourselves. So, back to the skies. On Tuesday, Jupiter will finally leave Cancer and enter Leo for the next year. Jupiter in Cancer spent the last 12 months teaching us emotional safety. The same emotional safety that we're going to need to take our next steps boldly and authentically into the world. To realize that we are no longer the person who experienced the pain, but the person who overcame it. You now know that you're deserving of a softer life, a gentler landing pad, a better situation, whatever that looks like for you. Not because you worked hard for it, but because you know you don't have to anymore. Jupiter in Leo says you've done the healing. Now let yourself be seen. For me, this feels deeply connected to individuation. If you know me, you know I'm a psychology girly. Carl Jung believed that much of our life is spent constructing a persona, the version of ourselves that earns acceptance, that keeps us safe, belongs to the tribe. But eventually, there comes a moment when the true self begins knocking from within. Not asking to become louder, asking to become truer. If you've been through a difficult year or a difficult decade, and you're wondering what the point of all that healing was, if you were always worthy of a better life, why did it have to be so hard? Perhaps this is it. You didn't fight to earn your place in the world. You fought to discover who you are under pressure. So that when Jupiter enters Leo and invites you into the spotlight, applause won't define you. Criticism won't destroy you, and admiration won't change you, because the fire of your identity was forged long before anyone started watching. Perhaps that's why tall poppy syndrome feels so relevant to this particular transit, because the fear isn't really a fear of success. It's a fear of visibility. The fear that if people see who we really are, warts and all, they'll leave. They'll stop watching. They'll go silent. The spotlight will fade out. The curtains will close. But what if authenticity doesn't cost us our belonging? What if it simply helps us find the people we were genuinely meant to be with? Now, another character in this story is the Mercury Retrograde in Cancer, creating an opposition to our full moon on Monday. Now, this transit sheds light on an internal tug-of-war between our greatest ambitions and our emotional and mental security. Use this retrograde to help you decide how to balance these opposing forces. This isn't the week to rush onto the stage. Mercury's full reveal won't become clear until early August, when it exits its post-shadow retrograde. However, it creates an opportunity to reconnect with the story you're telling yourself about who you are. It's the week to rehearse, draft the novel, practice the speech. Essentially, prepare your next moves. This time out isn't punishment. You're not being benched by the universe. Retrogrades are an opportunity to refine. Now, supporting this transit is Mars entering Gemini. Normally, Mars acts first and thinks later. It's very impulsive. It governs our impulses. However, Gemini wants to ask questions, explore, experiment, be curious. Together, they invite us to think before we act, but not to think ourselves out of our truth. So be careful in this transit not to intellectualize your feelings to a point where you invalidate them, any more than you could be tempted to romanticize them with Venus in Leo. I always think a nice middle ground is to recognize that two things can be true at once. I don't think this week is really about the full moon or Jupiter or Mercury. I think it's about something much bigger. It's about the moment we realize we've spent years trying to become acceptable, palatable, comfortable for everyone else, when perhaps we were always meant to become authentic. The full moon asks, what mountain have you been climbing? Chiron asks, did you mistake achievement for worth? Mercury asks, what story are you still telling yourself? And Jupiter in Leo asks the final question. If you no longer needed anyone else's permission, would you finally let yourself be seen? Because the universe didn't spend the last year breaking and mending your poor, worn out heart just so that you could hide it. This is the breath you take before the roar.